I can't even remember. I think it was probably just an idea implanted in my head of, oh, you should play an instrument. So I tried a bunch of instruments and was terrible at all of them. I tried piano for a while. I tried violin. Just nothing was clicking. And then my cousin, I had an older cousin who I kind of, for a while, lived in the same town as me, and he got a drum set, and he started playing drums. And I remember going to his garage and seeing this beautiful, gleaming drum set. And anything he did was automatically cool in my mind, so that was it. I decided to play drums, and then he gave up drums a year later, but I just took it all the way.
I am the youngest of three, and both my elder brother and elder sister were both musicians. My brother played guitar. He's 2 years older than me. My sister played piano, but I really gravitated towards my brother's record collection early on. All the Led Zeppelins and The Who and Deep Purple and Humble Pie and Queen and Jimi Hendrix. And I was the annoying little brother that would be scratching his records. I told you to stay away from my record player.
My mom said, you got to come in and watch this show. It was the Ed Sullivan Show, and I saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. I mean, I basically turned and looked at her and went, I want to be the Beatles, I want to grow my hair, I want girls going crazy over me. All I knew is I wanted to be in the Beatles. I had never seen anything like that, and that feeling has never left me.
When the Beatles came along, about 10 or 11, the drums, I thought, that looks like a good job. But all I had was every upturned trash can in the house and plastic, buckets and stuff like that. And then I got my first Sears and Roebuck snare drum. Cost $36. It was a snare drum and a little tiny cymbal. Came with a pair of sticks and an instruction manual, which promptly went into the trash can.
My father was a musician first and a psychiatrist second. Of the four children, I was the only one that really seemed to take to music, and as far back as I can remember, I was playing the drums along with some of the albums that we had at home. And I do remember asking him, hey, Dad, can I start taking drum lessons? I was 5 years old.
My dad was a band leader, clarinet player in a Dixieland band. And he used to rehearse the band in the house. And I remember hearing the band from my bedroom, grabbing a book and playing along. That was it.
My dad, who passed away in '08, was a drummer, and he was my first drum teacher, and he was my drum tech out here in LA for 18 years. After he retired in Detroit, my mom and dad moved out here. My mom played vibes, jazz vibes, in his band in Detroit. My dad would take me to his gig, and since he was a leader, he let me sit in, and the guys in the band was not gonna let his 12-year-old son sit in on Satindal.
I got my first drum, a little Sears drum set when I was 3, and played that and used to play with my mom while she was playing piano. And then I switched to piano and didn't play drums for a number of years. I played piano from the time I was 6 until 11 and played trumpet for a couple of years. I got braces, and playing trumpet, I couldn't play trumpet anymore because the braces were cutting up my lip and I was bleeding all the time and I couldn't stand it. So that's when I made that fateful switch.
Probably about the age of 5 or 6. We had music in the house all the time, there was always some kind of music going on. And my cousin played drums in a marching band, so that drum was always around, he was always playing with that. So that brought me into it for sure. I was also taking piano lessons at that time, but drums won over. They'd have a marching band, which would, it was a neighborhood marching band, and they would just march down the street to rehearse and everything, and all the kids in the neighborhood would follow them around, It's almost like the second line in New Orleans, That was it. From then on, I was playing drums.
My parents wanted to give me an early start, so I think I was a 4th grader, and they took me to the local music store in Columbus, Ohio, and I was going to consult with somebody about what instrument I should play, and I was thinking I wanted to play the trombone. And then when I got to the store, I saw a bunch of guitars on the wall, and I thought about the Beatles, and I said, I want to play guitar. Do you have a guitar teacher? And they said, no, we don't. And I said, oh, how about, do you have a drum teacher? And they said, yes. And that was the moment I decided to play drums.
I took guitar lessons, and I was, 12 years old by that time, or 13, whatever. And I didn't have the patience for that, so I thought, well, I'll get a bass, and that's 4 strings, that'll be easier. But, you know, that was the same thing. So then I thought, okay, I'm gonna try drums. So I saved up my allowance money, and I bought a drum kit, and it was so easy, and I knew I'd never have to take lessons because it was very natural.
Well, my parents are both musicians. My dad was a professor at the University of Michigan for 40 years. For lunch, during elementary school, my mom would have lunch for us, my brother and I, and we would listen to classical records, and she would say, oh, what instrument is that you hear? What instrument is that? So we were kind of thrown in right away.
My family was a musical family, and my mom sang in the choir and all that kind of thing, and my sister as well, my older sister. So actually going to church, weirdly enough, was my first exposure, and I was 7 and I joined the choir and all that.
My mother was a drummer in college, so she was in the Iowa City Scottish Highlanders band. She was a snare drummer. It was a thing when they marched, they'd go. And so on and so forth.
My teacher told my mom about jazz camp. My mom sent a telegram to the jazz camp about this terrific little kid drummer. And I was always the kid drummer. They invited us to come out. When we arrived after a pretty arduous 2-day drive, they were surprised to realize I was only 7 years old. You were supposed to be 14 years old to attend this camp. But I played for Stan Kenton personally, and Stan was savvy enough to invite a local news photographer to this audition of sorts. So I became the small, talented kid drummer guest of these camps. Now, these weren't called jazz camps. Jazz was a dirty word back in the early 60s. We had all sorts of euphemisms, stage band, lab band, similar to the film. When I went to high school, it wasn't the studio band, but we had a studio orchestra.
My drum teacher, he said, so you want to play drums, we're going to just start you on the snare drum, and it's just going to be a symphonic approach to the snare drum, just the hands, but eventually you'll get to play the whole drum set, and here's what that sounds like. And he sat down at the drum set in a room that was like 5 by 5, so a lot of sound pressure, and he sat down to the drums and went, boom, cack, cack, boom, bat, boom, bat, bat, boom, boom, bat. And I just started laughing. I couldn't stop laughing. He said, what's so funny? And I said, I don't know. That just it's the greatest thing I've ever heard. And that sealed the deal. I don't know what it was. It was that beat and the volume. It was really loud. A couple of years later, I was going boom, cack, cack, boom, boom, bap.
Becoming interested in music, it was this time, it was like sort of late 70s, early 80s New York. And the punk rock scene was just sort of still kind of happening. And seeing a band live and seeing women play really was the thing that made me like, oh, okay, this is something, I love music so much. I'm like obsessed with buying records and reading fanzines and all that stuff. And I think that the skill level required for that type of music was kind of low. So all those things, it was like a perfect storm of like, you can do this.
In those days in England, most rock and roll drummers that are in all these bands that became famous, they started off playing Dixieland or skiffle or jazz. They were all at it. Charlie Watts, Ginger Baker, Ian Pace, John Heisman. I mean, all these drummers basically used to do dance gigs. So that's what I grew up playing. I turned professional when I was 12 years old. I joined my dad's band, and he had about a 9-10-piece band.
I was 13, 14 years old. I was playing with a lot of different people. By the time I got 16, I played my first professional gig with Roy Eldridge. And it was like a club in town that would bring musicians in. They would come in as singles, and they would look for rhythm sections. And at that time, I was 16, and I was good enough for them to call me, But my father had to go along with me at the clubs because I was underage and stuff like that. But by the time I started playing with those guys, I knew that was it. That was the turning point. I was, going to do that.
It wasn't a very popular decision in my house. It certainly was not considered a viable career option. They wanted me to do something that would be safer, perhaps not such a treacherous road as music. You know, it's a notoriously volatile business, but I didn't care. I mean, I was determined. It didn't matter what anybody said. I thought, I'm going to do this.
I mean, I was so blown away by the scene, the music scene in New York City, the music scene in LA, San Francisco was so far beyond anything that was going on in Baltimore. Like, I was in one of Baltimore's first like new wave punk bands called Scratch and Sniff, but there wasn't a lot of that going on there. It just wasn't. I went home and I packed my bags and I was like, I've got to go and try this. And my parents' last words to me were like, remember, if it doesn't work out, you can always come back. So that's true.
Drumming was something I did every day, but instead of sitting on a pad, paradiddle, that's a paradiddle, by the way, right, left, right, left, right. I wore this shirt special for y'all. And instead of sitting there on a pad every day, I had teachers and band directors and my parents that said, you know, sitting in a room by yourself, you know, not that great. You got to practice your rudiments, and you can play along with your 33 1/3 records, but you need to play with other human beings. Your brother's a bass player. Why don't you guys jam? So we jammed so much that we finally brought in a guitar player and then horns and a piano player. And we had this band. We loved Chicago. So we called ourselves, we bought blue shirts, ironed on the Chicago logo, and put a Roman numeral 2. We were Chicago too. I told Danny Serafin, the drummer, was Chicago. He goes, no, you weren't Chicago too.
That is a setup I've been playing 30 years.
The kit becomes such a personal thing. It becomes your, also because unlike flute or any of the, you know, other instruments that I still am jealous of to an extent, drums are hard to carry around. It's like the kit is not an easy thing you don't just show up into a room and slide your kit.
Drumming is fucking annoying, I have to say. Whenever we play shows and we fly in, we have rented a gear, and it's like I'm setting up all this shit, and it's like, oh my god, there's like 800 things to get just so. And drummers are like kind of OCD, I think, in general. But once you get it, it's like a sports car. You're just like, it's amazing. There's nothing like it.
My standard kit right now is, 24-inch kick drum, but I used to 22 by 18, 24 by 16. I always carry my pedals like probably every drummer does. That says that tension that you like. 12-inch rack tom, 10-inch. For a long time, since 1982, I reverse my toms. So I go 12, 10, and I like 16, 18 now. The reason why I like the 16 and 18 is I spend most of my time doing kick, snare, rack tom, floor tom. So those things should be slamming.
For me, it's just sound. I feel like I make sound for a living, and there's so many palettes to come from, to explore like a painter that, why not try to use them all,
The drum kit I used with David Lindley was just crazy, out of this world. With I was a Swiss Army helmet, kind of in the centerpiece of it, which was a gift from a club owner in Switzerland that had all these crazy found object sculptures everywhere. And so I was hitting it with a stick, and he goes, "Oh, you like the sound?" I'm like, "Yeah, I like the sound." He goes, "Oh," and he goes into his barn and comes out with about 5 helmets.
My kit changed about a year and a half ago when I got the gig with Zappa Plays Zappa. And I've always been a 4-piece or 5-piece guy. And I've listened to the music of Frank Zappa since I was about 13. I've been a die-hard fan. And am lucky enough now to be in Zappa Plays Zappa, playing with Dweezil, playing all of his dad's music. And to pull all that music off, you need a lot of stuff. So I had to change it when I got that gig. So I went from being 4 or 5-piece guy to 7-piece guy with rototoms, sampling pad, chinas, splashes, and bells, and all this other stuff. So now I have this huge setup that's for that gig. So when I'm not doing that gig, I still use my 4-piece kit most of the time.
This is kind of my standard setup, I guess, over there. Yeah, just like 1 rack and 2 floor toms. And they're kind of the classic modern drum set from the 40s that guys like Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa incorporated that kind of setup. Kind of what I've done other bigger things, and live I do add a few things, but that's the basic thing that I make my noise with, and it kind of works for me.
Mid-70s, suddenly drum kits started to grow. and everybody wanted to use double bass drum and lots of tom-toms. And frankly, when I saw that happening, I had a great affinity to it. I loved it from a musical point of view. So it doesn't matter what I'm doing, I adapt my style to go with the music, not the kit. The kit stays the same. And even if I just play kick, snare, real straight, groove, the sound of that kit with everything resonating is so different when you take all the other drums away. It has a resonance to it that everything plays a part, even if you're not playing it. Now, sometimes I do use a smaller kit for fun, especially if I play at the Baked Potato here or Café Cordial, and it's great. I mean, sometimes I'm hitting things and they're not there.
As you get more successful, the schlepping gets less annoying. So that's basically your rise as a musician. You're like, it's how luxurious your schlep is.
I was a little worried about moving to New York, when I was 21, and then the clincher for me was talking to friends of mine that did live there and realizing that it's very difficult to have a car. So pretty much no one has a car. I have to move drums all the time.
My friends in New York that are going, yeah, man, I'm working in these jazz gigs, and the first night I can take my snare drum and bass drum, second night I can take my hi-hat and cymbal, but come hear me on Friday night, because then Saturday I got to take back the cymbals, and I tried in the subway, and I was like, you do what?
And that sounded like a total nightmare to me, and I was like, I'm out, there's no way I want to do that, so I'm gonna go to LA.
A friend of mine called me up. I was out here in California, and he said, you're not going to believe this, but he said, I think Jethro Tull, check this out. Jethro Tull might be looking for a drummer, and he read the ad. And I remember thinking, God, it's going to be a long way to go not to get a job like that. So, of course I did. So I went over, I'm totally jet lagged, went into a rehearsal studio it was in Islington, and that went pretty well, except the problem is all of my equipment got held up in customs. I didn't bring my whole drum set, but I brought, my trap case, cymbals, snares, sticks, pedals, this really essential stuff. But it didn't make it through. So I'm playing this kind of, it wasn't a totally broken down kit, but it was, a lot of people play, and it just didn't feel right. But I remember thinking, I've got to transcend this regardless. I've just got to put it all forward. And I thought, I would rather lose this gig by playing the way I honestly feel that I should interpret it, rather than playing an imitation of the other guys, because Tullis had an amazing series of drummers. Well, 5 minutes before the audition is over, the door opens and in comes my trap case from Heathrow with all this. I thought, great, that's really helpful now. Ann called a week later and said, okay, we've made a decision, we'd like you to do it.
Every child that goes to public school, I think it's their right to be able to be exposed to music and the arts. I think it's that important. And I say this because I'm a living, breathing, example of it. I went to public school, and that's where I learned to play music, and that's where I learned to play the drums. And I wouldn't have graduated. There's studies that show that kids that take music classes or art do better in their other classes. Attendance is better, graduation rates are better.
I wanted to study drum set. So when I graduated, I finally was going to study drum set for the first time with a real drum set teacher. Because at Indiana University, they had no drum set instruction. At Indiana University, it was all orchestral. Monster discipline there. If you can get through Indiana University, there's nothing, that's what prepared me to be able to do the Kennedy Center honors. That's what that training was for. This is not just rock and roll anymore. This is seriously understanding way beyond your instrument.
And I decided to go to Indiana University because primarily of two reasons. One, David Baker, the head of the jazz department there, is a phenomenal educator. They have an amazing jazz program and orchestral program, and Kenny Aronoff was the drum set teacher there. So I did all jazz and orchestral percussion, and then studied with Kenny and did all this rock stuff. So it was this perfect mix of orchestral, jazz, and rock all at the same time.
The most important teacher, not only when I was young, but really throughout my whole life, was a gentleman named George Gaber, and he was the head of percussion studies at Indiana University. He recognized that I had some anxiety about playing it right, not wanting to make a mistake. Gaber put a piece of music in front of me, sat back down, and then instructed me to play that piece, but if I played any of it correctly, he was going to walk over and hit me with this timpani mallet. And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "You heard me. Play the piece, but if you play any of it right, I'm going to whack you." So I proceed to play it upside down, backwards, making every possible mistake I could. He puffed on his cigar. He said, "Okay, fine. Now walk over to that window. Tell me what you see." Clouds still in the sky? I said, "Yeah." The trees are still there. It seems like the earth is still spinning, right? I said, "Yeah." He said, "Now, you just played that piece of music worse than anyone could ever possibly play it." And he said, "And what happened?" "Nothing." He said, "Now, let's start."
Let's do nines again. So just think 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nice. All right, now move right hand hi-hat to hi-hat.
When I was in school, I realized that there were students who loved the teachers that, you suck. You need to work harder. You need to work harder.
Nice.
Me personally, it's like I want someone that wants me to grow and shows that appreciation for my putting the effort in.
And that's how I like to teach also. Like inspire people to do what they love to do, something that we're all passionate about, and push them to their limits and push them to do things that they don't think they can do, but not do it in like an abusive way.
I took lessons with all kinds of different teachers, and everyone were different in their methods and in their way of getting through to you, which is a great thing. You can just absorb all the different ways, different kind of options, and then decide on your own what to use and what not.
Yeah, now let's put it in a 3+1. So let's do 3 of those and then do 1 bar fill. So dun 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 bump dun dun. So the 4th time bail on the hat and go down the toms. Yeah, nice.
First thing you learned from Mr. Baller was this right here. You are the drummer. When you get to class, full class of concert band, everyone's warming up and doing their thing. And so this is what you can do. You're allowed to do as a drummer. You could play on your knee. You could not play on the drums, and you could not make a sound. And then once the class started, your sticks were to be in one hand and like this. And it was kind of a valuable lesson, too, of discipline.
I won a concerto competition at Indiana University. It was a violin concerto. I saw Itzhak Perlman play, and I realized I had to play a marimba piece on my senior recital. I realized if I'm going to spend a year working on a piece, I'm going to learn that one. It's the most beautiful piece it's called The Introduction to Rondo Capriccioso by Camille Saint-Saëns, and it's this violin concerto, and you can play violin music on a marimba. So I spent 3 hours a day for 365 days, basically, and won a concerto competition with it.
When I found my first really good drum teacher, I was about 14. His name was Roger Kahn, and he was not only a brilliant drummer, he was probably only about 16 or 17, but he was a great teacher. And because he was so inspiring to watch, I was thrilled to be able to study with this guy. So that's when I really began to drink it in.
Not till I got to junior high school or middle school, there was a band, there were 2 bands. There was the concert band, and then there was the Lancer band. To get into Lancer band, those were the best players. And at the beginning of the year, everyone sort of gets to try out, and then he picks the players. His name was Henry Tilton. To this day, I'll never forget him. He was an older gentleman. Yeah, he wasn't sweet and nice and nurturing. He was kind of a taskmaster. Stop, and he would walk around, and I see him coming over to the drum section, and I'm just like, oh man, not good. And he took his baton and he stood behind me. Very intimidating. He stood behind me and he tapped tempo on my shoulder with his baton. And I'm trying like hard to play it, and I feel it a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit, then the foot stomping. And first of all, he was like embarrassed, stop. Everyone turns around, and it was embarrassing, you know, like you guys, you don't even play a melody, you don't play a melody, all you have to do is keep time, what's wrong with you? You know, like that kind of stuff. And what it did though, as I must say, that is similar in the film, although on a much different level, it did make me go and learn it, because I didn't want to come in the next day and be the guy that was like, didn't have it together.
I was studying with this guy, and it was he wasn't as overtly hostile as J.K. Simmons' character, but he was brutal in a lot of ways, and he was incredibly opinionated. I don't know why. And I later discovered wasn't even a particularly good drummer, wasn't particularly respected, but he was a teacher. And that's what his thing was. I'm a teacher, and you know, so he somehow elevated himself by design or otherwise out of being a player. At the end of this lesson, this harangue had escalated to the point, and I remember being really heated. And he finally just said, you know, you're never going to make it. You don't have what it takes. Ooh. And I just remember thinking, I left and I stood on that exact corner where that scene was shot, catty corner to Carnegie Hall before the concert, you know, contemplating it. And I thought, I'll show him. If I didn't have that internal sense of self and confidence that I had something, it could have wrecked me. I could have maybe never played again. And I think it was 3 weeks later, I got the gig playing in Tio Macero's big band. Now, Tio Macero was Miles Davis's producer from the late 50s right to the end, and he was a phenomenal producer.
The toughest band leader I ever worked for or alongside with would be Joe Zawinul. And Joe was the co-founder of the group Weather Report. I joined the band in 1978. I just turned 24 years old, and stayed with the band for quite a few years. Joe kind of came from that macho jazz school with his Austrian, almost Nietzschean, like, you know, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger kind of thing. It was common with some of the hardcore older jazz guys that they would poke you, and if you poked back, then that was good. If you shied away or went away with your tail between your legs, then you didn't belong there in the first place. He was maddeningly tough and demanding at times, but he was a genius, and geniuses usually get a pretty wide latitude in my book.
Yeah, I'd heard a lot of horror stories about the kind of cultish environment that the Magic Band, Captain Beefheart and the Magic Band was. I'd heard stories about broken ribs and guys getting thrown downstairs and psychic interference, but I'd also heard that he had mellowed since those years, and he was anything but mellow. He would say things like, give me that sound of Fred Asparagus dangling through the teacup. You know, blue babies levitating over the mountaintops like BBs on a plate. And you'd have to kind of think pretty fast and come up with something, and you go, that's what I wanted. You knew that.
Recording with John Mellencamp was brutal. It was constantly, like, the teachers pushing you, just like, is that all you got? You play a song once and you go, what do you got, Kenny? It's like the same song. He'd even say it was the same song. So all I know is one song. You got to come up with something different but unique.
Don is his real name, Captain Beefheart, would compose a lot of the music kind of on the spot. And he would blame me for psychic interference. He said, man, can you guys feel it? He's doing it to me again. He's putting tinfoil in my radar. And the other band members would be scared. They go, oh yeah, we can feel it. Yeah, we feel it, Don. I said, well, do you want me to leave the room? He goes, no, it wouldn't do any good. You're humming middle C in your head. Stop doing that. I said, okay, all right, I will. It was still one of the most important musical experiences, I think, in my career, to play with somebody whose music I really held in high regard and still do, and to get a front row seat to his musical process, which was quite interesting.
He calls me down to his room after the second day and went, Kenny, we gotta get this record done, and the producer's bringing in some session guys, and you go home and I'll pay for the rest of the week, which it might have been $150, I don't know. And I just said, no. I'm like, did you just say that? Because you have to remember who I'm saying no to. It's like the meanest football coach. You don't say no. You just go, yes, sir. And I went, no, I'm not going home. And then these words, am I your drummer? And I'm going, I can't believe I'm saying this. He goes, like, what are you talking about? I'm like, am I your drummer? Am I the drummer in your band? He went, yeah. So if I'm the drummer of your band, I'm going to watch these guys play my parts on our record, and I'm going to benefit from that. And you're going to benefit because I'm your drummer. I could not believe I said that. It just came out of me. Anyway, and you don't have to pay me. I'll sleep on the floor. I don't care. And I stayed for 4 weeks and sat there and watched and learned, wrote things down, went back, set up a plan based on what I thought I needed to do, practiced 8 hours a day, lifted weights, ran, was like a Marine. Like, just everybody get out of my life. This is what I do. My goal was, I'm going to make the next record. The next record won a Grammy, and we had 2 number 1 hit singles that launched my career, which was Jack and Diane, with the big drum break, which is still played on the radio 30 years later, and Hurt So Good. And I was part of it.
When I was on tour with Weather Report this one summer, and we were touring in Europe, it seemed like the lighting rig was a little lower to the stage than it had been before. And the net effect was, when all the lights got turned on near the end of the show, it got really, really hot. You know, the steam is coming off your body. And it was hard to play these very fast, very loud tunes at the end of the show, which had a tendency to kind of go on and on. So I had gone up to Joe, who pretty much was a music director of the band, and said, Joe, when we're doing this last vamp, when I get to the end of my energy, I'll give you the signal, I'll give you the high sign, and can we take the tune out? Or I kind of said it like Elvis's fact, we'll take the tune out then, okay? And he went, mm-hmm. And so that night, I give it my all. I get to the end of my energy, and I look over at Joe, and he just looks at me, and he leans into his keyboards, increasing the volume of what he's playing, and he continues playing. Now we have another whole long cycle before the tune can possibly end. I can't believe it. I'm so angry. And I'm hitting the drums as hard as I can, and I'm playing the beat, but every time I hit the drum, I'm thinking the most incredible combination of 4-letter words you can imagine. Mother, and then finally, triumphantly, he looks over like, okay, now we finish. And he and the band stop, the lights on cue, black out. I keep playing. I'm so furious, and I won't stop. And I'm just hitting the snare drum, like, son of a... My eyes are closed, and I sense a presence. And about this far away, I open my eyes, and there's Joe Zawinul's face. So the first thing I expect is that I'm going to get bopped right in the nose, you know? But instead, I see that he has this look of glee, almost. And I'm still banging away. And I hear him say, yeah. And he jumps off the stage, kind of punches his fist up in the air. I finish, bow, kind of. I walk off the stage, confused. And he finds me, and he comes up, and he just says, thank you, man. We go to the next town the next day. I'm summoned to Joe's dressing room. So I walk into the room, and there's the band, and they all have these plastic cups half filled with cognac, and one is handed to me. And Joe holds the plastic cup of cognac up in the air, and he goes, "Last night, Peter graduated."
Real success is the people who are by themselves, doing things perfectly. When you're working your butt off by yourself, nobody's seeing you, nobody's watching you, you're a successful person.
You want to be the glue, you want to be the good guy. Of course, you're usually the guy with the truck, too, or the van. That's a good tip. You know, have your own wheels.
A lot of you guys are starting to play, they don't want to learn the basics, and which is the rudiments, you know. And I tell them the rudiments are just like playing the scales of the piano. If you don't learn those, you can't play the piano. So you have to learn those. You say, well, you have to learn the rudiments. Let me see that. Oh, do I have to play those things? So I want them to play these things because that helps them to get around the drums.
It's a constant. It's always moving, so you just gotta go with it and try to stay up. You know, as I get older, I kind of realized you have to stay current too, see what's happening, so you don't become a dinosaur. You know, by the time you're 40.
You know, fusion music and modern jazz and Indian music and a lot of ethnic music, R&B, and every imaginable genre that existed in New York City, I sought out and I tried to understand it. And that was good, and I think that in that way, I didn't have any preconceptions about what was good. I knew things that I liked more than other things, but I had a pretty open mind, and that was a great place to be, with an open mind, because I just took it all in.
To not be narrow-minded, listen to lots of different types of music. Learn to play music, not how to play the instrument. It'll come hand in hand, but you're learning to play that instrument in order to play music. So why don't you just play the music first? That's how I learned, and it really stood me in good stead.
I wish I would have been more open-minded to different types of music earlier on. And I wish I would have got into reggae and blues guys. And, you know, there's great country drummers, there's great jazz drummers. It didn't come till later for me until I started to do more of that. And then I became a more well-rounded musician because of it.
All the stuff we're talking about, grip, reading, balance, styles, all of that is only half of the pie. Dude, what's the other half of the pie? Like what I wear? Well, that's part of it, but the other half of the pie is how do you get along with people? Are you somebody that people are gonna want on their tour bus for 6 months? Or are you gonna be a pant load that brings the whole party down? Are you gonna lift people up? Or are you gonna be a drag and complain? Nobody wants a complainer.
I mean, nobody wants to be in a band with an asshole, you know? And if you're the drummer and you're an asshole, there's another guy right behind you waiting for that gig. He might not be as good a drummer, but he might be somebody that is a team player that gets along. And then the other thing is ears. Listen to the music around you.
These muscles on the side of your head are very, very important. Those are the best musicians that I've played with, ones that are good listeners and you can have a conversation with.
For me, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate, when you first see that band or hear that album, that just like makes their hair stand on its end, and you just have that feeling. It's
Finally, the drummer can walk in with their instrument just like the guitar player does. You can come in with this over your shoulder with your brush, and maybe a tambourine on your foot, like that. So you can, it also gives you a better chance to walk away with a date, because you don't have to wait and break down all your gear.